All right, what is up, everybody? Oh, Richard's just bopping his head already. We are closing out day 4 of TBRCon 2023 with an author reading, and I'm joined by none other than Richard Swan from
Hello,
Coruscant. How are you?
I'm well. Yeah, live from Coruscant. They've got Town away with me, although she'd be on Camino, wouldn't she? Yeah, I'm good, thanks, mate. Yeah, it's a lovely sunny day here, so I'm just a little bit warm, but okay. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Yeah, having a
Pleased to
great
hear it.
day and enjoying convention week. But Richard, for people who don't know you,
Mm.
tell us about yourself.
Yes, sure. I'm Richard Swan. I'm an author from the UK. I currently live in Sydney in Australia, and I'm writing full time. I am the author of the Empire of the Wolf trilogy, the first of which was the Justice of Kings, which came out last February 2022, and the upcoming The Tyranny of Faith, which comes out on the 14th of February this year, 2023. And which I'll obviously be reading shortly. I also have some self-published sci-fi from many years ago now, and hopefully many other things in the pipeline, which I can't talk about at the moment. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Right on, and I'll show off those covers there. So we got the
Oh, there they are.
Justice of Kings on the left and the Tyranny of Faith on the right. Beautiful, beautiful
Beautiful.
covers.
That's right.
And of course, Tyranny of Faith coming out on February 14th. There's lots of love in this book.
Yeah, the early reviews have been like wonderfully positive, and so I'm really pleased with that, and I think my publisher is as well. And the kind of the pre- the pre-order numbers, like in objective terms, they seem like low, but they were really happy with them. So I think it's all relative, but they were like, these are great numbers, and I was like, really? They seem like they're quite low, and they were like, no, this is good. So everybody's pleased.
Everybody's pleased, except David
Everybody's pleased.
Walters, because he's in the chat saying this frigging guy really scraping the bottom of the barrel, getting you in here,
Hey,
Richard.
feel free to log off. Jesus,
Yeah,
coming in
go
here
away,
with that.
David.
Go away,
Dude, you're
David. Go
worse
and do
than
something
Ryan
else.
Cahill. Get out of here.
Ryan Cahill. I'm sure Ryan's a really
That
nice guy.
oh, he's wonderful, but he's a naughty, naughty Irishman.
He is.
Um,
He's a smack bottom.
Richard, can you give a little bit of synopsis of the series as a whole,
Of course.
and the Justice of Kings, and then the Tyranny of Faith, and then we can get
Absolutely, yeah.
into a reading.
Yeah, the Empire of the Wolf follows the story of Sir Conrad von Volt. So Sir Conrad is a kind of wandering magistrate. He's an ultimate authority to kind of enforce the common law. So he travels from kind of village to village to town, and he has got a couple of magical powers. He can compel people to speak the truth. That's called the Emperor's Voice, and he can speak to the dead in sort of certain circumstances. So he can use necromancy. And in the Empire of the Wolf, it's kind of on a it's final weeks and months really, as we kind of learn in the first paragraph of the first book, so that's not a spoiler. But the story is told by Helena, who's his 20-year-old clerk, and she's an old woman now, and she's reminiscing about her time with Sir Conrad, as he embodies the kind of the rise, decline, and fall of the Sovan Empire, and so there's lots of as in all fantasy novels, there's some political machinations going on, and different factions vying for power. So it's a kind of like a Sherlock Holmes style story. So
Hmm.
the first one is a murder mystery, and the second one I made sure to sort of keep an investigation in there as well. So that's second book is an abduction. So the sort of the second in line to the throne. The emperor's grandson is kidnapped, and von Volt, although he wants to go and sort of charge off south and face his nemesis Bartholomew Claver, who's this kind of insane priest. The emperor's like, no, you have to go and find my grandson, and so he sort of investigates that, and lots of different things happen. But that's it in a nutshell, really. So it's good stuff. I really like book two. It's my
Yeah.
favorite of the three, actually, because I've written book three. But book two is my favorite. Yeah.
I have not read it yet, but I have read the Justice of Kings. I can't wait
Mm,
to read the Tyranny of Faith. David
good man.
Hopkins in the chat. We were just talking about this before. The cover artist, is that Martina Fakova? Is that
Yeah,
her name?
Fachkova. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Fakova. Yeah. So I'll show that off one more time. Richard was just telling me before we started recording that she uh, was nominated or won an award for the
She
cover.
was juried into some kind of prestigious, exhibition in New York with that cover and another illustration she'd done. I just found about it today. My the art director at Orbit messaged me on Instagram to say. So that's really cool. Yeah, I mean, it's a stunning photo. Gosh, heaven forbid, stunning, stunning illustration. So I'm very lucky to have her. I hope she does all my books forever.
Yeah,
She's
and
probably
of
quite
course
expensive.
Richard had a huge part in that that artwork getting nominated, but you know.
That's right. Well, I mean, I came up with the idea, so did I?
Probably Lauren Panapinto did most of it, but
Yeah. I'm gonna pull this in.
all right,
Okay.
Richard's gonna fix his green screen so Coruscant doesn't disappear on us. And then tell us about the
Right.
section of the book that you're gonna read, and why did you choose that section to
I
showcase the tyranny
yeah,
of
I
faith?
Well, I did a little poll on Twitter yesterday, and I said, shall I do a sort of eldritch horror style part, or shall I do a battle, or shall I do a kind of crisp dialogue section in the eldritch horror one with a sort of about 50% of the vote? So there's a couple of scenes I can do that aren't too spoilery. So I chose this kind of like a sort of mildly horror scene. So this is chapter 17 in the book. It's called "In the Temple of Nema," and yeah, that's the reason I picked it really, and it's also just quite cool bit. So
Right on, man. Well, I will let you take it away.
okay. The Temple of Nema was an old Saxon cathedral that looked as though it had been constructed by 3 generations of architects and builders, each with a different vision of how the final building should look. Though the immediate effect was one of an imposing structure rendered in Southern Gothic, with all the statues, flying buttresses, and steep conical roofs and towers dressed in dark grey slate that came with it, there were sections that lacked all ostentation too, like the Grand Lodge. At either end of the transept were copper dome sections, which looked as though they had been plucked from the architectural traditions of another country entirely. We entered and briskly walked the length of the interior. The imperial soothsayer resided in a special chapel which branched off the ambulatory at the eastern end of the temple. To reach it, we had to walk past the altar. In smaller temples, and especially in small villages and towns in the imperial hinterlands, the altar would be a simple wooden bench with the skull of a deer, boiled free of all its organic tissues and blessed by a Neman priest, placed on the centre. Here, Nema herself was rendered in a colossus of marble, a woman with a deer's head, haloed by a ring of what was undoubtedly pure gold. She held in her hands an elaborately carved altar of rich dark mahogany. I could not help but feel utterly humbled by the statue, which must have stood 20 feet high. I looked over to von Volt to see if he too was impressed by this colossus, but to my surprise, he seemed visibly pained. His eyes were screwed shut, and I could see the muscles of his jawline working as he clenched and unclenched his teeth. Are you all right? I asked. Von Volt had slowed his pace, and now he stopped, gripping the end of a pew to keep his balance. No, von Volt said. He was visibly sweating. I feel dreadful. I had hoped my sickness was waning. Instead, it feels as though it has been collecting in a barrel, which has suddenly now been unstopped. I had to suddenly dart forward to catch his arm as he staggered. It was not the intimate contact I had hoped for earlier in the evening. I grasped at him fruitlessly as he staggered, and then sat down heavily on the pew. He spent a few moments breathing deeply, his eyes closed. I knew that he would be feeling acutely embarrassed. Fetch the soothsayer, would you? I'm all right, I just need to catch my breath, he said. The words rang false, but I did as he bade. I quickly crossed the apse to the ambulatory, where a number of chapels were located, though I did not have to go into any. An old woman, gaunt and grey haired, intercepted me. She exuded the kind of aura which engendered immediate trust, like a wise grandmother. Given what I had heard, I had expected her to resemble a scrawny, deranged hermit, not this quiet, scholarly woman before me. I heard your companion, she said. She nodded over my shoulder, and I turned to where von Volt was clearly visible on the end of the pew. She squinted. That is the new master of the magistratum, is it not? Is he all right? He's suffering from some malady. He has been for weeks now, but we do not know what is causing it. I dared not give voice to our fears that the malady was eldritch in nature. 'Tis not communicable, I added hastily. The soothsayer was quiet for a few moments. At first I thought she was weighing up whether to approach von Volt in case he was the host of some pox, but she seemed to be troubled by something else. What is the matter? I asked. Again she was quiet. She frowned and continued to squint, but as though she could see something in the temple entranceway. I followed the line of her gaze, but the place was empty apart from the 3 of us. I'm not sure, the soothsayer said absently. She bit her bottom lip and worked it between her teeth. What did you say the nature of your master's ailment was? We do not know. You can't catch it, I said again, but she shushed me with a wave of her hand. No, no. I was really quite troubled by her reaction. She started to walk slowly toward von Volt, but every step seemed to pain her. When she drew level with the altar, she stopped again. "Why did you come here?" she asked. She would not take her eyes off Von Volt, who seemed oblivious to the soothsayer's reluctance to approach. "You have heard of the abduction of Prince Camille?" She nodded, but even then I still did not have her full attention. "Sir Conrad was hoping, given your connection to the boy, that you might be able to divine where he is." The soothsayer did not stir for a little while. Then she turned to me, as though surprised by my presence. "No, no," she said. She sounded almost confused. "Such a sad and terrible business, but I cannot help you with that. That is much beyond my ability. I sense that he lives, still, if that is of use to you. I know there are many who consider him to be murdered." I opened my mouth to answer her, but she resumed her slow approach to Von Volt, now constantly looking over to the doors at the far end of the aisle, and then back to him. "My Lord Justice," she called out to Von Volt. To my surprise and consternation, her voice came out cracked and hoarse. Von Volt looked up, and as his eyes met the soothsayer's, she suddenly gasped. "What is it?" Von Volt asked. He looked blanched, and his face was sheened with perspiration. "I think you should leave," the soothsayer said. Her composure fractured completely. Her face was a mask of naked fright. "I think you should leave this place, and quickly. Something ails you, and I think being in the temple is making it worse." "What are you talking about?" Von Volt asked, his eyes closed. "I have come here to seek counsel, and I have given it to you. Your companion here," the soothsayer said hurriedly. "She actually gave me a small push in my back. You must leave. Now, I am sensing a great malevolence about you, Sir Conrad. Whatever it is, it does not like you being in this place." Von Volt's expression curdled. "Spare me your riddles, woman. I am here on official business. What is it you supposedly sense?" The soothsayer was backing away, hand pressed against her heart, heading back to the chapel from where she had first come. "I do not know," she said. She was verging on frantic. I had never seen someone go from being so calm and serene to so agitated. "I do not know." Then she stopped. Something seemed to seize her. Her elbows were pinned at her sides, and her eyes rolled back in her head. She made a number of choking sounds, and I moved forward to steady her, but stopped when Von Volt shouted, "Don't!" He was standing now, his illness forgotten for a moment. We watched as the soothsayer shuddered and convulsed, and then uttered a stream of absolute nonsense, though it was clearly language of some kind. I watched, aghast, as the seizure ran its course, and then the woman seemed to regain herself in a moment of shocking and intense lucidity. She looked, wide-eyed, to Von Volt, and whispered, "The Father of Time is a stern patron." "What?" Von Volt asked, features creased in confusion. The phrase jarred with me, too. I felt as though I had heard it somewhere before. "It is coming for you. I have seen it." She looked at the doorway and gasped. Her face was a mask of horror. "I see it now!" "What in Cassavar's name are you talking about?" The soothsayer began to weep openly. "It is coming for you, and you must outrun it." Then she simply turned around and fled, like a conscripted peasant fleeing a cavalry line, back to her chapel. Von Volt and I stood for a long time in silence. I looked constantly at the cathedral entranceway, but there was nothing there, not even a hint of a presence. A presence. I thought of my nightmares, of those of the household staff, of Claver's words in the Temple of Savar, and I shivered, profoundly uneasy. Eventually, Von Volt pressed himself to his feet. "Come, Helena," he said. "I am sorry that you had to see that." That is it.
Mm.
Thank you.
You told me we were gonna get into some weird stuff.
Yeah,
David
yeah.
loves your voices. I do too, man.
Is he? Oh, thank you. Should do my own audiobook, although Lucy Peterson does a fantastic job.
That was really good, though. I really enjoyed that.
Thanks.
So we're going to be doing a little bit of a Q&A section
Okay.
here. So I got a question from Twitter. This is from Eleni. So let me just pull this up.
Of course.
All right. But in the meantime, let's talk a little bit. How was it for you in terms of, you said you already finished book 3. So I imagine obviously that's going through editing phases.
It will be soon. Yeah, it will be
with
soon.
with Orbit. But for you, is it conclusive that this is a trilogy? And how do you feel about that?
At the moment, it is, yes. And I have pitched to Orbit a follow-on trilogy, which is set still in Sova, but 200 years later. So that's much more of a kind of flintlock fantasy. And the reason
Ooh.
I wanted to do that was I love the idea of doing a sort of sequences of novels which follow the Sovan Empire, but as it progresses over many centuries, and so a sort of like a just pre-Napoleonic sort of colonial United States era kind of novel, and then like one that's almost like World War One, and
Mm-hmm.
perhaps even beyond that. So I love that idea, and it's something I've really wanted to do for a long time. So if we do revisit Sova in a sort of official trad pub sense, it will be that trilogy. So that's really cool, and I'm very excited about that if it happens. But it's I do kind of short stories. I've done a short story about Von Volt when he was younger, and
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty of scope for more stuff like that, and just bits and pieces in and around Sova. So I doubt it will be the last we see of Sova, but it will certainly be the end of Helena's story, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and probably Sir Conrad as well.
Yeah, that kind of gives me a bit of a vibe like Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn,
Mm,
where there's the different eras, and then with the Wax
yeah,
and Wayne
right,
books, you start to get like you're saying, like guns and
right.
trains and steam engines and stuff. I love that. Yeah.
I only learned this because I've not read any of any of his books.
Hmm.
But I only learned this a couple of weeks ago that that's what he did. That he basically a bit like Ken Follett, I think he progresses his fantasy empire through like different epochs,
Hmm.
which is a cool idea. I mean, I didn't know anyone had done it, but obviously everybody's done everything. Nothing is unique anymore.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. So that was a revelation for me as well. But yeah, so yeah, I will be emulating that even when I can.
But in your own style, of course.
Of course, in my own style, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, every story will be about legal ethics, obviously.
Oh, great. Uh, David Hopkins was asking any theater background because you did a great reading.
No, no, no. I just thought I would, lean into it a little bit, and
Just
forget my
naturally
self-consciousness.
awesome.
Yeah, just carrying that gravitas. I'm a trained courtroom advocate, so that might have something to
Okay.
do with it. I don't know, but
You do
no
know how
sort
to
of.
project your voice.
Thank you. But
Mm.
it's no sort of formal theatrical training, no. Or any amateur actually. No amateur of theatrical training of any kind at all. No dramatics in my past.
Just dramatic in the day to day.
That's right. Exactly that.
Okay, so Eleni, so serious question and then
Mhm.
silly question. We'll start with
Okay.
the silly first because I like
Okay.
silly.
hmm
She asks, "What would you sacrifice for Mark Strong to play Von Volt?"
A great deal is the short answer. Mark Strong is my ideal casting for Von Volt. I think he's probably a shade too old now because I think Von Volt is supposed to be in his mid 40s, and I suspect Mark Strong's probably in his mid 50s at least. So, but a lot. Maybe if I had to pay some of my own money towards his fee, I might do that. Actually, I got an email from the producer who bought the film and TV rights to Justice of Kings
Oh
the other
wow,
day. So hopefully, should be seeing some sort of material that they're putting together for the pitch in the first quarter of this year fairly soon, which is exciting.
right on. Well, congratulations.
Mm. Yeah,
Uh,
thanks, man.
okay, and now for the serious one. Was it
Mm.
fun to have Helena as an unreliable narrator?
She. It's difficult to sort of answer that question without giving away too much. But what I wanted to, the question I kind of asked in book two, really, because obviously if you've read book one and you know sort of the arc of Von Volt and his character, and he starts off as this quite sort of straighty 180 stickler for the letter of the law, and then by the end he isn't so much that. And the question in book two really is to what extent is Von Volt changing, or to what extent is Helena, kind of actually changing and realizing sort of certain things herself.
Mhm,
So there's a hint of unreliability, certainly, and I think I even say at one point in book one or two, it's I'm just giving an account of the things I remember. I omit a great deal. So and obviously a fictional account because I made it up, but
mhm,
but so it's not supposed to be like a kind of Patrick Bateman, American Psycho level of unreliability where you
Mm-hmm.
question whether any of it happened at the end. But there's subtle unreliabilities for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then building on that, Cassidy asks, with so much of the focus being Von Volt's storyline, when did you decide to use Helena as the POV instead of Von Volt himself?
That was always
Nice.
how I approached the book. Yeah, it was. I loved the way Robert Harris framed the story of Cicero in his trilogy,
Mm-hmm.
which is excellent, by the way. A huge inspiration for Empire of the Wolf. And he framed it from the perspective of Tiro, who was Cicero's slave, and sort of not slave in the sense of slave, in the sense of
Mm-hmm.
like a Roman slave. So he was actually sort of pretty well-to-do kind of secretarial kind of clerk, and I loved that frame. I thought to have it from Von Bolt's perspective would be just nowhere near as good. It would be kind of quite dry and staid, and whereas Helena is much more kind of mercurial, and so
Mm-hmm.
much of it's like about how she views Von Bolt and his actions. And I wouldn't want Von Bolt to kind of say, "And I killed this guy because this is how I was feeling at the time." I wanted it to sort of be filtered through a lens of someone else who was still learning and still kind of his apprentice and his mentor,
Mm-hmm.
and just her relationship to Von Bolt and how that kind of changes and evolves over the trilogy as well. It felt like a very rich seam of kind of character development for both of them, to mine. So it was all that was always the go-to intention. I had never planned to write anything from Von Bolt's perspective.
Nice. And Al Swearingen in the live chat, maybe a
Mm.
big question. What inspired you to start writing the Empire of the Wolf trilogy to begin with?
Oh, that's easy. Yeah, gosh. Probably. Well, number one, that Robert Harris trilogy, the Cicero trilogy, which is Imperium is the first book, which is an exquisitely good book. And Cicero started life as a lawyer, and then he became a kind of statesman, and so that's the same kind of arc that Von Bolt follows.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think the kind of I said this before, but I think the catalyst was a family trip to Exmoor, which is a kind of part in the southwest of England, and it's quite kind of, especially in winter, it's quite bleak and moody and barren. It's not
Mm-hmm.
barren as trees and grass and whatever, but it feels quite oppressive, and the
A
weather was cold,
wasteland.
and yeah, exactly. It's not kind of fallout. It was it's quite beautiful in a kind of pastoral way, but it felt quite bleak, and there were a few leaves on the trees, and it was that I was like, and I'd had this idea for a kind of traveling justice, and it started. I wrote it as a short story to start with, and submitted
Mm-hmm.
it to a few places, and it was rejected, and so I built it out as a novel from there. And it was that plus I went on a trip to Bruges, which is a gorgeous kind of medieval city in maybe Belgium or the Netherlands, one of the two. I think it's Belgium. And it's got all this kind of old, medieval town and stuff, and just seeing all the heraldry and the statues and things. And it just kind of, I thought, yeah, I'm going to write this. And the first thing I did when I went back is I drew the Haugenate family tree, which is the kind of imperial
Mm-hmm.
royal line. And so I built this kind of big sandbox and stuff. So yeah, a couple of bits and pieces really. Nothing kind of fully was like, I'm going to write this novel now. It was,
Yeah.
as with all these things, there was a bunch of stuff that kind of, and I was playing a lot of Witcher, Witcher 3 at the time as well on my
Nice.
Xbox, and I was like, this is a fucking great game. So I just wanted to kind of emulate that as well a little bit with that a kind of Slavic aesthetic, which I thought was very well done. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, bunch of stuff really.
Right on. And sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Mykard Smykard or Mitchard Smitchard, I'm not sure, but they are in the chat asking, is it easier to write science fiction or fantasy settings since you have written science fiction in the past and now
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
writing this trilogy?
I would definitely say sci-fi for me. I just I've been writing science fiction for such a long time now. It just I've just slipped back straight back into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you're a sci-fi, if you look at someone like sort of Peter Hamilton, and he has these kind of like concepts which are kind of basically the same in all his sci-fi novels, like neural mnemonics and what speed travel and stuff like that. So I think once you've kind of built your own sci-fi universe, you're always kind of riffing off that to a greater or lesser extent. And so I find that um, that sci-fi baseline has served me very well over the kind of the 15 or 20 years or so I've been writing. Fantasy was a bit harder for me. I don't read a lot of fantasy, and I haven't read a lot of fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And I found I found it a little bit constrict. I think that's why Justice of Kings is such a sort of character focused story, although there's a lot going on in the background as well in terms of the politics and stuff. Because I found the sort of the slightly medieval aspect of it a little bit constrained. Science fiction, you can do basically anything you want, and science, fantasy, unless you're insanely creative, you're fairly constrained by dudes with swords, and armor fighting. I mean, that's your baseline, and whatever variation you're going to, that's kind of what you're working from. So unless you have a fairly unique magic system, I think it's for me it can be quite a kind of, I love it now, and especially with the kind of next trilogy I've pitched to Orbit with this kind of flintlock fantasy, I have just loved doing the maps, like the evolution of the map from like the first book over 200 years, and they've got like canals now, and like how have they cut those, and there's iron ore over here, so we're gonna have like so all this kind of stuff. And I've bought like a bunch of history books, and I've been reading about the French and Indian Wars and all this kind of thing. So I really like it now, but I think when I first started, and part of the reason why I avoided writing in it is I felt it was a little bit constraining, which isn't true. It isn't true. It's just my issue rather than anybody else's. I think there's some absolutely. I mean, you look at Perdido Street Station, for example. It's one of the most creative works of fiction I've ever read, and that's obviously fantasy. So it's a big sandbox. But I think when I started, it didn't necessarily feel that way.
Yeah, perhaps it's something like just the constraints of the sandbox are different.
Right.
You kind of have to feel it out and see like what your framework is going to be, and then you can start to work within that.
Yeah. And even if it's, something as simple as travel, unless you're going to have like everybody has like a pet dragon that they fly on, even like traveling to the next village or town or city is like a weeks long, affair that just most people never did. So, setting wise, unless you're going to kind of use magic to kind of speed things up, or whatever, or I use the Imperial Relay, which is basically kind of like a medieval Pony Express. That's again that's a constraint. But you work that into the narrative, right? So in book 2, they travel all the way down to the frontier, and actually I enjoyed writing that because they kind of traveled the length of the empire, so that was kind of fun to see how the geography changed and stuff. It was fun for me. It might be boring for a reader, but I love writing it.
I mean, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is essentially all walking, so
it is. It's a walking holiday.
Take it or leave it.
Yep, that's what
just
it is.
A walking simulator of a fantasy book. Oh, brilliant. All right. Ryan's back. I came here to hear Richard say verisimilitude in his sexy voice. So if you want to close us out by saying, oh, there we go.
A wonderful verisimilitude. I think I can hear him over in New Zealand. He's only a 3-hour flight away from me.
He just said something very naughty in the chat.
Not so, Ryan. Behave.
You naughty, naughty man. All right, Richard. Well, we will close it out there. I'm glad, Ryan, you made it at the end. That hit the spot. You sick fuck. All right. That again is The Justice of Kings, which is out now. You can pick that up. Tyranny of Faith is out on February 14th. I believe that's in hardcover, correct?
Yeah. Even in Australia, they're doing hardcover, which is nice. They didn't even do that for book 1, so there's obviously a little bit of potentially misplaced confidence behind it. We shall see. What the sales numbers come in.
Is that coming out in audiobook as well?
It's across all formats. Yeah, it's everything. Beauty. Absolutely everything. If it's a format, it's coming out in it.
Excellent. Ryan's going to be happy about that. All right. Well, Richard, thank you for that awesome reading. I'm very excited about this book. It was nice to hang out with you as well.
Yeah.
Thank you to everyone in the comments for throwing out some questions, and everyone for watching, and Ryan for being a sick bastard. That's why they sent you down to the end of the world. And Richard, thank you so much for taking part in the plotting, pantsing, and approaches to writing panel yesterday, which I recommend everyone go check out if they want to hear about different takes on how writers approach their projects. And thank you for tuning in for day 4 of TBRCon 2023, and we'll see you tomorrow.
See everybody.
Bye, everybody.